Okay, now we should be live. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Success Grid podcast. My guest in this episode is Bronson Hill. He is a general partner at 1,500 multifamily units worth over $150 million. Bronson is the author of the single best investment strategy during or after a pandemic. Bronson, welcome to the grid.
Hey, really excited to be in the grid, man. You guys are doing some great work here. Really excited to add value in any way I can and have a great conversation. So
awesome to have you here. So we were talking a bit like seconds ago before going live. So you are basically an entrepreneur, an investor. You're involved in multiple things in real estate and businesses online. So give us a little bit of an insight about you.
Right. So for years, I was in medical consulting. So I worked for a manufacturer of medical device products. So I worked in surgery, helping cardiologists or heart physicians to work on patients. And I wanted to stop doing it because I wanted to get control over my time. And I realized I was making a lot of money for someone else. And so I basically said, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to try to grow as an individual. So I basically started buying single family houses, which, in different states in the US, and I started renting them out. So I had a property management company and I was renting these out. I had 4 or 5 houses, but I realized it was a lot of work. And a lot of people, I think, no matter where you live, what country you live in, it's just people know real estate is a great way to become wealthy, but there are certain ways that are better than others. And so I had a mentor, which was a cousin of mine. He showed up and he had been doing apartments or multifamily investing for years. And he said, these houses, this sounds, like a lot of work. He's like, why don't you just stop that and do apartments? And I said, well, I'd love to, but I don't have the money. And he said, well, you can raise the money. And so I learned about this thing called the syndication, which is basically how you structure and you pool investors together and you're able to buy large apartment buildings. Now we do it in the US. There's also, it's kind of known as private equity in other parts of the world, real estate private equity, but it allows you to use other people's money to raise money to go buy apartments. And it's a way I've been able to about 20x my net worth in the last 4 or 5 years and become a general partner in now it's actually over 2,000 apartment units. So it's been fun. And actually there's a lot of tie-in with the online presence and growing an online business and growing your network. And so I think the story is applicable to a lot of people, but it's also something people might say, hey, I want to actually learn how to do this as well, because I think it's a very compelling business.
Yeah, so you now talked about there's integration in your business between real estate and being online. So first of all, do you think in general, to separate the two, for example, which is better in general, to start an online business or to be in real estate for people who are, let's say, looking to start something new to generate revenue and income for themselves?
Yeah, so I think there are businesses. Some businesses and some industries are better than others. Now, in the U.S., my background was sales. So if I was in an industry like selling used cars or used automobiles, it doesn't really pay that well. It's a very competitive business. You work hard. There's a reputation around used car salespeople that they're just not very ethical people. But if I sold airplanes, or if I sold like I did medical devices, or I sold multi-million-dollar real estate, I could make a lot of money. So I think it's important, whether you sell online or you sell or whatever your business is, it's looking at the economics of the business, right? So the business of real estate, no matter where you live, there's a lot of money trying to find its way into real estate, in and out of real estate. If you can find a way to get involved with that, I think it's a great industry to be in. Some people do it where they flip houses, or they buy stuff and fix it up and sell it, or they are a broker where they help other people sell their properties. I don't like that as much because it's more of a transactional business, right? You have to work more and it allows you to be able to sell. With an online, especially with real estate, online business with real estate, it allows me to not be tied to a location, to scale up. My educational platform, which is what I have about 5,000 people on my list. I've got a number of investors, and I can, I've traveled 5 times internationally this year. We're recording this in August. And so it allows me to have a more free life, as well as generate good revenue for me as an individual. So I love it as an online business. It's not only online, there's some in person as well, but it allows me to have some flexibility over my time.
Okay, can we go and expand on this and explain how? Basically, because when I hear, for example, real estate, that means that I should go to the place or the home or whatever physical location and do the thing there and do the deals and contracts there and show the people the place. So how it's done, the process?
Yeah. So that, a lot of people think too, especially when you're going after smaller things, that, I'll buy a house or I'll buy an apartment and I will rent that out, or a condo, and I'll do the work and I'll manage it all myself. When you start thinking in terms of bigger numbers or bigger properties, it opens up a lot more opportunities. Now in the US, I don't know how it exists, in other parts of the world, but the US has something really unique where there's a lot of financing available to go buy apartment buildings. So sometimes you can put 20% down or 25% of the total purchase price down, and you can finance the rest. And, a unique thing about it is, the larger the property, in some ways, the easier and the more efficient it gets. So right now we're buying a 227 unit apartment complex in Florida. And we're putting, a certain percentage down. Well, we have a full-time property manager who's dedicated to that property. We have a leasing agent there. We've got multiple on-site maintenance people that are there. And my partner helps with the asset management, making sure things operate. So I live in California. He's in Florida. That's a long way. It's a 5-6 hour plane ride. So my business really is involved around the education of it, right? A lot of people have a money problem, meaning they have money and they don't know where to invest it. They don't know where to put it. So what I do is I educate them on how it works. Everybody knows they should do real estate, right? But they don't want to deal with the things you mentioned. They don't want to deal with the tenants. They don't want to deal with the toilets. They don't want to do all this work. So is there a way they could do it passively? So what I do is I educate people that are wealthy or business professionals or other things on how they can get into this asset without it taking up more of their time. So my value proposition is, hey, we can try to, the goal is there's no guarantees, but, in general, our goal is to take a $100,000 investment and try to double it in 5 years. That's a pretty standard plan for us. Sometimes it goes way better. Sometimes it doesn't go as well as that. But in general, that's a goal that we tried to go for. So as we educate people, my business really is on the education side, and it's having connections with investors. So I do all of that online to help create more of a presence for my business.
Well, that's great, because a lot of people, for example, if we are talking about real estate, sometimes I think there is some kind of a fear related to it because of what happened back in 2008, right? Do you think that it's a risky business or it's a safe one?
I think 2008, 2009 were a special time. I think there was, we can look back at least to the US and just around the world, there were a lot of loans being given, at least here, for people that really shouldn't have qualified for them. And we could really look at it and say it's a bubble. Well, in the US, and I think all around the world, there's been, I can say in the US, over a 24-month period, they created 40.9% new currency. So they just have all this new money out there. And in general, if you look at inflation and what rents cost, I mean, at least in the US, I imagine it's elsewhere, it's just an equation, right? The more money you create, the more rents generally go up. So I look at it as a very safe investment, because you can see the trend line of, hey, here's where inflation is and here's where rents are. And it's completely correlated, where you see it kind of going up. So there may be some fluctuations in the valuation, but if you buy it right, one way we try to really, reduce risk, because again, Warren Buffett, who I really follow a lot as a famous investor, he said, rule number one of investing is don't lose money. And rule number two is don't forget about rule number one. It's just whatever you invest in, just don't lose money, right? So you always want to have what he calls a margin of safety. So the margin of safety we have is right now, for example, the current property we're working on, the rents in each unit are $922 per unit. And we know if we spend $6,000 per unit, so out of these 227 units, we spend $6,000, just do the floors, the walls, we do some work in the kitchen, a couple of new appliances, that the going rate is $1,460. So that's almost a 60% upside. So as long as we can achieve those renovations in that property, we have this, we call it a value add approach, right? So if you buy brand new apartments and you only expect, hey, things are always going to go up forever, well, there's some risk in that. What if things do come down? But the fact, if we're buying stuff that's a little older, we're renovating it, it's called forced appreciation. So we know that's in the market. Even if rents come down a little bit, we've still got a huge buffer there. So we like looking for things like that, where we find that margin of safety, where, if things go great, we're going to do phenomenally well. If things don't go well, we're still going to do fine. And in general, we're going to do well, right? So we try to make sure that we have some margin in there.
Yeah. So speaking of this, I think like in the past week or so, something like that, the Federal Reserve in the US like made a session, and I didn't really follow through it, but I think maybe they increased the interest rates, right? and the Bank of England also did the same. So does that basically, from what I know in the US, two increases in interest rates, meaning that there is inflation, there is a recession. So if that's the case now, for example, now we are recording, we're talking here, it's August now, early August. So does that affect these kind of businesses, especially in real estate?
Right. So one of the best places to be in a recession is in workforce housing or multifamily apartments or some sort of, middle-class housing. And so with apartment buildings, you think of it like in the US, again, I can't speak to other contexts such as Jordan, but when people in 2008, 2009, 2010, if they lost their houses, where did they go? They went to working class apartments, and that's what we have. Now, another risk that people don't talk about, because what'll happen is the confused mind always says no, right? If it's like, oh, I don't know, there seems there's some risk here. And yeah, rates are rising. We typically have a fixed rate or at least a cap on our interest rate. So we know that our interest rate over the next it's actually 4 years because we have 3 years plus a 1 year extension will not go above 6.5%. So we know as long as we can do the renovations, we're going to be just fine. Now, I will say, as long as we can renovate, we can make sure that can happen, we'll be in good shape. But what I mentioned about the inflation is something, again, in the US, we're talking about it a lot. The official rate here is 9.1%. But when you actually look at the unofficial rate, it's around 15 to 17%. When you look at the cost of housing, you look at how much, petrol, gasoline is costing, it's much, much higher. So if that's the case, the confused mind says, I'm just not going to do anything. If people wait 2 years, they could have lost somewhere between 35 and 40% of the value of their wealth. So I look at investments that are inflation hedged, and I think to me, there's no better place to be than out of your currency, because again, currency isn't money; it's just the way we store value. So getting out of dollars or getting out of your local currency, whatever country you're in, and getting it into an asset that has a hedge. That it's very difficult to create new apartments. It's not going to be any cheaper in the future to create them. And there's no technological advancement that has come where people are not going to need a roof over their head and a place to sleep, right? We don't have any sort of, with all the disruption happening, there's no foreseeable technology that's going to do away with that. So we know that at least in the US, there's a big shortage of housing. So, there are different factors as it goes with this, but I think in general, I think some people will wait, but I think right now it's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Warren Buffett said, don't lose money, right? Do you think, for example, for people not to lose money, what should they do with their money? Should they save it, or do you don't believe in saving money?
Yeah, so I wrote an ebook recently. It's called How to Use Inflation to Your Advantage. It's at my website, bronsonequity.com. And so people can download it for free, but it's 50 pages. It basically just says there's several ways you can use inflation to your advantage, because the poor and middle class, they usually get punished by inflation, right? If you don't, every time you go to the pump, you're filling up, you're paying for fees for different things, services are going up, everything's going up, and you're going to be punished by that unless you can make inflation your friend and you can have it work for you. And how you do that is you buy assets. So Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he says an asset is something that puts money in your pocket every month, and the liability is something that takes money out of your pocket each month, right? So a house you live in is not necessarily an asset because it doesn't necessarily pay you. It still costs you to live there, but a rental house or a rental property is. So the idea is if you can buy stuff, especially if you can get debt. So even at 6.5%, we said inflation is between 9.1 and 17%. I'll take all the 6.5% debt I can get, right? Because I'm actually borrowing at a rate below inflation. And then when I pay off in the future, I'm paying off with future currency that's worth less. So, and I know the asset in the long term is going to be worth more because they keep creating more currency. So that's how people get ahead in real estate, is they use leverage, they use debt to be able to buy assets, and they pay off in future dollars, and they know the asset's going to be worth more. So this is an opportunity where people get really, really wealthy if they understand how to safely use leverage. And I'm not giving anybody any specific advice, but it's something to consider. There are other ways you can store value. I like precious metals such as gold or silver. There's a monetary history of over 5,000 years of these things. Some people like Bitcoin or crypto. We've seen a lot of volatility there lately, but this
one is very volatile. It's not safe investment.
Yeah, it's not really an investment. I would say physical metals, I think, are a great place to store because, the more currency they create, you can't just, show, okay, here's more gold or here's more. So what are the things that you can't easily create more of? You can't easily create more assets such as real estate or precious metals or other commodities. If you invest in oil or other sort of, types of commodities, those are hard to just immediately, produce. So I think all of those things are positives, but where it gets really magical is if you can find debt to go buy assets.
Yeah. So because you now mentioned some examples, like for example, real estate and gold and silver, right? Do you think there is other or more things that people can get as an assets, or these are the main things that they can have as assets?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more. I think it's basically anything real. I mean, some people, politically, and I don't know in what country, this is allowed, but sometimes people will have guns or ammunition, just not necessarily as a protection, but just as a hedge, right? So anything that you create that's tangible, that's physical, that's real, that is tradable, I think is good. I also think having a great business right now is great, because if you have a great business and you have loyal people to your business, they're going to pay those increases as well. Everybody knows that rates are going up, at least in the US, 10, 15% a year. Everything's costing more. So I think having a great business, having some skills that you can adapt to the marketplace. I mean, what happens is when you have times like this, historically, you have a lot of disruption, right? Everything changes, so people are always looking for opportunities to save money. They're looking for opportunities to find value. So if in your online business or somebody who's creating an online business, if they can find a way to create value for people, there's always going to be opportunity for that. So I think, another asset is not just the things that you buy or the things you invest in, but it's also what you're creating and how you're serving people. And I feel like if you can create enough value for enough people, you'll do great. Zig Ziglar was he was a motivational speaker. He said, you can have everything you want in life if you just help enough other people get what they want. So that's how people get paid, is we find a way to create value that people will pay for.
Yeah. So speaking of this point, exactly, adding value, how do you, for example, suggest to people or people who want to be entrepreneurs in general and have a business, how they can add value? What are for example, the process, or what is the thing that they should focus on?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I think the most important thing when it comes to any business, especially an online business, is really trying to figure out who you're trying to serve and getting really specific on that. So to me, when I started this, I realized I wanted to start it with a very specific person in mind. So there's a guy I used to work with, and he doesn't know this, so don't tell him, but there was a guy named Bart, and he worked in medical sales or medical consulting, and he was, his late 50s, mid 50s. And I kind of knew what his problems were. He had 2 teenage kids. He was getting ready to send them off to university. So, and he kind of like necessarily didn't like his job, but he couldn't retire, right? Because he didn't have enough income to be able to retire. So I started thinking about, like, I have a 2 or 3 page spreadsheet. Here's Bart's concerns in life. Here's his issues. He wants to send his kid, he wants to retire. He wants to, like, these are the concerns he has. And then whenever I do anything in my business, I ask the question, does this serve Bart? And if it doesn't serve Bart, then I probably shouldn't do it. But a lot of times we start a business and we think, I'm just going to blast this out. It's going to be everything to everybody. But yet it ends up serving nobody. So, but if you pick one person with one particular set of problems, people will really latch onto that and resonate. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is find out we call it an avatar, find out who is the specific person, what's their name, what's their age, where do they live, what's the biggest problem, what keeps them up at night, where do they hang out, what are the things that they're using now, what problems do they have. And once you can really get into that, even before you have a product, you'll start to understand. So I think if you can, figure out who you have served in the past and just figure out, who, like, where's the opportunity, or who really can I serve? But I think when you start with just a very specific person or an avatar, it can be very helpful.
Yeah. So I saw that you basically talked or learned from about more than 1,000 investors, right? Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you learn from? I don't want to say from them all, but what have you learned from some of them?
Well, how much time do we have? I can go to every single one. No, I've actually spoken up with over 1,300 investors one-on-one over half-hour Zoom calls. And basically, they have a lot of common problems, at least people that I talk to. A lot of these people are wealthy. They have, maybe they're physicians, they're business owners, they're lawyers. And a lot of them, they're very interested in, reducing, like, saving time. They don't have a lot of time. A lot of these people are very, very busy people. They're also very interested in reducing taxes. So there are ways in the US and different countries of the world where there are different tax incentives. Some people call them loopholes. I call them incentives. But in every country, there's ways you can reduce or potentially eliminate your taxes because governments put incentives in there. For example, with housing, where they'll say, hey, if you help be a part of creating housing for this particular group, and in this way, you can reduce or maybe eliminate your taxes. So people say, there's a guy named Tom Wheelwright who wrote a book called Tax-Free Wealth, and he speaks all over the world. And he just says, like, people say in different countries, oh, you can't do this here, but then there are ways the government allows for business owners or everything to reduce or save taxes. So that's very important. And then also, people are interested in retiring. They're interested, how do I create enough, even if I make a lot of money, let's say I make $1 million a year, but if I leave, I don't make any money. So what do I do that's going to help generate cash flow? And so people generally are interested in growing wealth. They're interested in going cash flow, how they can leave their job and how they can really move forward. So I think that those are all primary things for people that are very wealthy. I'd say one last thing is that they're also very interested in learning. So like a podcast like this, they're interested in learning how to grow, because there's a saying by Brian Tracy: if you want to earn more, you have to learn more. Right. So it's a catchphrase, but it's also true. It's like, really the way to get to the next level is to educate yourself, not necessarily through going to university or doing a master's program, but actually going and taking information in and meeting new people and all this stuff. Networking and education is very powerful.
Learning is very important. It's a continuous process. It's not, sometimes it relates to some people that you go to school or college or university, but it's not actually what you learn outside of these walls is what is more important, actually. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. Yes, do you think people in general should focus on the money side of things, or on learning and developing and having passion for what they do and not pursue the money first?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's important to look at both because, for example, I enjoy music. So I write songs. Over the years, I've written about 100 songs, and I enjoy that. And for a while, I was thinking I was going to become a professional songwriter. This was a number of years ago. But then I realized, like I was talking about the industry, right? The industry of selling cars may not be as good as just selling used cars. Well, it's even worse in writing music. I mean, it's very difficult to make any money writing music. I mean, you can make money if you have a hit song, but it's very, 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 very difficult. So I think it is important to think about the economics of the business that you're going in. For example, restaurants in general, it's typically a pretty low margin business, right? And it's a very high labor. If you know anybody that's ever owned a restaurant, or maybe a family that's owned a restaurant, they're always working. And sometimes the margins are very low. They're usually less than 5 or 10% margins, which is terrible. So I think it's important to think about kind of where those things align. Where's the opportunity as far as financially, and how does that align with your passion? Can you get excited about this? I mean, to me, I have friends that sell insurance. I just couldn't get excited about selling insurance. Managing risk is not just that exciting to me. I mean, I have respect for people that do it, but you got to find something that really gets you going, gets you excited. You can talk about it. When I talk about real estate investing, I get really excited about it, and that's contagious. So if you can't get excited about it, you shouldn't be involved with it.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word opportunity, and it's a big word, because sometimes we see, if, for example, two things or two businesses doing basically the same thing. One is having great success and the other is not. So how can people in general find this opportunity for themselves? What do they need to look for? Where or what do they need to look for?
Are you talking about with real estate?
Real estate, or in general, if you have any ideas around that.
Yeah. I think, so I think, with there's some application, I think, from what we do in real estate. So a lot of what I do, people kind of ask sometimes, well, what would you say you do, right? Like, what do you spend your time doing, right? And it's kind of hard to describe because I do invest in property. I invest my own money. I do go visit properties occasionally. But I basically spend a lot of time creating content. So I look at this interview, this is creating content that someone's going to listen to, and they're like, I really like that. There's something I heard there, and they're going to want to reach out. And so I have a way that people can connect. They can download my ebook. They can get on my list. Maybe they'll invest in a deal. So I think it's just like, I really like the thought leadership platform, like what you have, Hussein. You have a place here where people can connect with SuccessGrid, and they can come in and they can, learn about how to grow their business, how to grow. You have a lot of skills and tools, and you're doing a great job at this. So as you do that, people are going to resonate, and they have, where they'll say, this is my guy. I want to learn everything. If you have a course, you have programs you do, you have events, they're going to be a part of that. So I think if people can, and I think this is probably more available than it's ever been. And it can feel a little intimidating at first. Somebody could say, well, I'm not very extroverted. I just like kind of being at home. This feels very uncomfortable being on a camera or being on a podcast. But I think, when we push ourselves to go out there and educate people on things that we know, we don't have to know everything. When we start talking about a topic, we probably know more than 99% of people about a specific topic. So if we can just help try to find a way to educate, there may be an opportunity that grows out of that. So I think following passion is good. I think, looking at the economics is good. And I think people over time, they kind of fall into, oh, this is kind of where I fit based on my passions, based on the opportunity, based on the mentors around. And I think all those things are important.
Yeah, awesome. So speaking of that, do you think that, for example, from your side, now people in this time should focus more into building a business, or should they focus on developing their skills for the marketplace, for a job that they already have, for example?
I think everybody's situation is different. I think, somebody who, I'm 41. If somebody's 41 and they're a guy and they've got 4 children at home and their wife doesn't work, they and their young kids, they may have to kind of be doing their job and just figure out how to make it work. It may be a little harder. I was pretty motivated. I looked at, either, at least in real estate, you either have time or you have money. And I really didn't have either. So I just kind of made the time. I just said, hey, I'm going to take the time. I'm going to just educate myself. I'm going to learn. And while I was educating myself, while I was learning, I started taking action. A lot of people, they like, I think about 90% of it's mindset, right? Tony Robbins, who I follow, he says, it's in your moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. So when someone actually makes a decision that, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to start this business, I'm going to leave this job. So I think if people have it in their heart, I just know for me, as I turned 40, I was like, I know at the end of my life, I would regret if I didn't go 100% after my dream. And I haven't had one regret about doing it, but it could have been that it failed. And but I kind of looked at the worst case scenario. I was like, well, if it fails, if it doesn't work, I could always go back to selling medical devices, right? So I think a lot of times we put in our head that it's this way bigger risk than it is. But I think, some people are just geared for it and have always done it, always been entrepreneurial. To me, I've had some entrepreneurial, yes, I've never really done it until recently. And I wish I'd done it sooner, but there's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like you mentioned, the most important thing in life is actually to take action, because if we keep thinking about things, or planning is good, but if you don't actually turn it into physical action or certain things that you do in the business, it's useless. It's going to sit there on the shelves and you won't do anything. It's like reading books. Reading books is good, right? But if you don't try to get some nuggets and apply certain things from it, then it's useless. So yeah. So speaking of books, what kind of books do you recommend? You mentioned like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What other books that you think are a good read, for example?
Yeah, so I read a lot of books. I keep a list. I'll check my list here. There's a really good book that's called Never Split the Difference. And it was written by a former FBI hostage negotiator in the US. And he had all these stories in here. It's just basically about how you interact with people and how you, just simple interactions and ways people are motivated and how to do it. It's an excellent, excellent book. It's called Never Split the Difference. There's another one out called The Third Door. So like door number 3, The Third Door. And it's about this kid who was 19 years old who wanted to go and interview Bill Gates and Lady Gaga and all these things, whatever. And he basically found a way to do it. And he found that with every successful person, he used this idea, and I don't know how this works in Jordan. I'm not really a nightclub kind of person, but in the US, there are these nightclubs and people stand outside and they wait to get into the nightclub. And he said, there's 3 entrances into the nightclub. One is this big long line where people are standing outside, and it's a mile long, and most people stand and wait there. There's the second entrance, which is the VIP entrance, where people pull up in their limousines and they get out and they go right into the club. The third one is where you get out of line, you run down the back alleyway, you knock on the window, you sneak in through the floor, you find a way through the kitchen, you just find another way in. And he basically made the analogy that almost every single person had this third door experience. So I guess the kind of the principle there is it's not a conventional, hey, I go do this, I get this degree, I check this box, whatever. Everybody that's been successful, they found their way, and they always found an unconventional way to do it. So that book was just really encouraging on that note.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, it's very important because sometimes, like earlier when we talked about plans, when you set a deadline, if it doesn't work on the deadline, you have to keep going at it and set a new deadline. Like I think Brian Tracy always also said that. So yeah, you have to keep going until you achieve what you want to achieve and taking action along the way, not just sleep on it. So I was going to ask you that what is something interesting that might be about you, and you actually talked about you write songs. So is there anything else?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of interesting things about me. I think a couple of things. One, I love traveling, like I mentioned. So I've been to 40 countries so far. So maybe one day I'll come visit you in Jordan, and we'll have a coffee or whatever, we have a good meal there or something. It'd be fun. But love traveling. I also do something called Spartan races, which are these kind of mud run type of obstacle course races where you climb over things, or you submerge, or you lift heavy things up a hill, and you also run in between. So they're very intense, but they're fun, and it gives me motivation to stay healthy. So it's fun.
So you mentioned earlier also that certain business owner or entrepreneurs we should be focusing on certain things and good at certain things, but we might not be good at certain things, right? So what would you say things that you are not good at?
Yeah, so I think it is important to know your strengths. There's a great assessment called Strengths Finder, or there's some other personality things that are really helpful. I would say in general, I am good at talking with people. I'm good at presenting information. I'm good at creating resources. I'm not as good at just mundane kind of repetitious tasks. So I try to hand those over to other people. I'm not as good at, sometimes I'm very organized, sometimes I'm more disorganized. But I think there's just things that, I like to think I'm good at a lot of things, but it's probably good that I'm not good at certain things, just to kind of help have other people do it. So I think I am, somewhat visionary, where I can say, hey, this is where I want to go. I think where I need help sometimes is, okay, what's the plan to do? How are we actually going to do that? What's the implementation here to make that happen?
Yeah, cool. So do you think there is something that I missed talking about certain things, especially real estate investing for, let's say, beginners, if you can add to this?
Yeah. So, again, it can feel really overwhelming. It's very common if somebody wants to get into real estate. And like I mentioned, you can have money or you can have time, and you can invest one of those. You don't necessarily, like when I started, I didn't have a lot of money, but I invested my time, and then I found a way to create value. Actually, I really didn't have a lot of time, but I just made the time. So I think, and really it starts with just learning, just educating yourself. I have my YouTube channel, Bronson Hill. If you search Bronson Hill on Bronson Hill Real Estate, you'll find a bunch of stuff on there. And there's all kinds of resources out there. We actually have a coaching program called Kingdom REI, which is dedicated to helping individuals to learn how to do this. So we do weekly and regular coaching with individuals to help them to grow, and it puts people in a community of others that are doing the same thing. But I think the biggest thing that I would say for somebody starting is take action, but try to go to as many conferences, meetups, ask questions. I'm sure in anybody's network, there's somebody in their world that does real estate investing, not necessarily selling real estate, because being a real estate agent or selling real estate, that's kind of different than actually investing. So I think if you just go and you just ask questions, people are usually very open to talk about their experiences if you come with a humble attitude. So it's amazing how you can just learn from anybody's story if you just kind of come with the right attitude.
Yeah, exactly. You must learn. So I believe that if you learn and apply what you learn and take actions, hopefully, well, not hopefully, well, for sure, with time you will arrive at your destination, right? Do you think that's correct?
I think it's 100% true. There's something that happens often that if you're like me and you have the background as an employee, if you're an employee, you work at a company, if you make too many mistakes, you'll get fired, right? You will actually you'll get fired. But as an entrepreneur, or as somebody who's starting, and if you are in real estate or you're doing an online business, but you're an entrepreneur, even if you still have another job, that you're an entrepreneur there, you have to be willing to make a lot of mistakes and quickly learn, just to learn from them. But you can't kind of get stuck, and just analysis paralysis is real, but it's just being willing to actually make mistakes. There's another good book by the same author, Robert Kiyosaki, a book called Before You Quit Your Job. And it basically describes that analogy about an entrepreneur versus an employee, the mindset. But he said, being an entrepreneur is like jumping out of a plane without a parachute and trying to assemble one before you hit the ground. And I think it's really true. And even if you can't fully assemble a parachute, you're trying to create a soft landing. So maybe you can kind of somehow create something and kind of land softly. But there's risk involved. There's things involved. But if you learn and you try, you take action, you're constantly getting feedback and help and talking to other people, you're going to learn. And I think at the end of the day, the learning is the most valuable part. That's how we grow as individuals. That's how we grow as humans. That keeps us alive. That actually keeps us healthy. I mean, I think of the most unhealthy thing for a lot of older people or people as we get older is we watch 5 or 6 hours of TV a day and we just turn our brain off, right? But when we're actually out there applying ourselves, we're working, we're growing, we're learning, it's going to produce growth in our life. Hopefully it'll produce financial growth in our life. But in general, it's going to put us in a place where we're continually growing. And I think that's really what we should strive after.
Yeah, that's very important. So, Bronson, when can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so love talking about this is a great conversation. I think there's a lot of tie-in with business owners and things. And I think our business really is we help individuals to either to do real estate themselves and teach them on our coaching program, or we have people that actually passively invest where they want to join or they want to hear about our investor club. So we have an investor club at bronsonequity.com, my website. I also have this book. I have a couple of ebooks. This one is How to Use Inflation to Your Advantage. That's at my website. This other one is also there too. And it's something that you mentioned. It's the single best investing strategy during and after a pandemic. These both talk about, there's stuff in there about multifamily investing, apartment investing, and how to get involved with it. But I really appreciate you having me on, Hussein. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, awesome to have you here. Thank you.